Well, mentoring for me has probably been uniquely important in the sense that I started a law firm right out of law school, which not a lot of people do, although I think more people are doing it these days than ever before. But because of that, I had what I would consider a very high need for mentoring because I didn't have a supervisor. And I didn't have a law firm that I worked in with people other than those who were my peers. So that meant that in order for me to really learn, I had to learn in a couple different ways. One of them was by experience and just by making mistakes, but even more importantly, to try to learn from those who had more experience than I did. And I found that I was able to create a network of people that I could call that when I didn't have the answer to a question, and I think that this happens often when you're practicing where you look in a book in the law and you don't necessarily see the practical answer, the experiential answer. I could call people to help me with those things, since I didn't necessarily work with people that could serve in that role. And actually, hearing from a lot of the people that, did work in firms, just because you work with people doesn't mean that they're necessarily able to be great resources for you anyway. So just the fact that I was practicing on my own, while I felt like it created a unique need, it also really taught me how to develop relationships where I could have a lot of mentors and that I could use that information that they gave me to really improve my practice as an attorney. And it's probably, for me, mentoring and having mentors is one of the most key components to my personal success as an attorney, both when I started and now and continuing in the future, just because you just can't know everything. Well, I created my first network of mentors through the Minority Bar Association Q-Law, the GLBT Bar Association, and I did that both formally and informally. I participated in a mentoring program. I actually created the mentoring program from Q-Law and was able to assign mentors to myself, which was interesting, and others. And I, through that process, got two mentors who just happened to be starting their own firm at the same time that I was starting my own firm. And although they didn't necessarily focus on family law, having them for just pure practice questions and business questions and that sort of thing was very invaluable when I was first starting. And their offices actually ended up being located in the same building that my offices were later, and they're still there. And my other set of mentors that I was able to develop relationships with were on the board with me with Q-Law. And even though I was a newer attorney, I was on this board where others had been practicing a lot longer in the area of family law, and I actually developed three very important mentoring relationships on that board that I continue to have to this day, and they are probably my go-to people when I have questions about family law, and even if I just want to vent about my cases. And it's especially important now too because I am currently a solo attorney. I practice on my own, and in order for me to do that successfully, I really need to be talking to people at other firms in order to get support and guidance, and to even just talk to you about complaining about things that are happening to me as an attorney, and so that I don't end up being kind of isolated. So those mentoring relationships have turned into in addition to mentoring, very good key personal relationships that I can help me feel supported in my practice, even though it's just me running the show. I think what made my mentoring relationship successful when I was being mentored is the amount of effort I put into proactively contacting those people in a way that made them want to respond to me. So I didn't necessarily, deluge them with questions, but I was willing to contact them when I felt I needed to, and I did so in a way that was respectful of their time. That was actually, kind of, I think, fun for them, and that also developed a personal relationship. So, we didn't necessarily just talk about cases or work, but also, sort of what was going on in our lives in other ways. And I think those three things together really made those relationships more successful than they otherwise would have been if I had just sort of sat by myself twiddling my thumbs and never reaching out to anyone and doing it in a way that maybe wouldn't have been as successful. I actually can't really think of any mentoring relationship that didn't go well, but that could be just because it didn't go well. And so I can't recall. I would imagine if a mentoring relationship didn't go well, it was probably because it was my fault in some way. I didn't reach out, or maybe they didn't reach out to me, and in a way that was continuing. I think it's really easy in our lives when we're so busy and have so many people contacting us to not respond to an email, or to just forget, or to let time pass so much so that you just, it's too late to kind of go back and revisit a situation. So I could imagine that would be what might happen, although I actually can't think of any mentoring relationship that hasn't been sort of successful from my perspective. There are different types of mentoring relationships, and varying levels of kind of involvement, and but none that I would consider to be sort of unsuccessful. I think that just talking about what they've been through when they've been in a particular situation, and particularly the things that maybe they wouldn't necessarily discuss publicly, or the difficult things, the hard things. I don't think that hearing about how they had such a successful trial is actually as valuable as hearing about how they dealt with a trial that they lost and what that made them feel like, and how they surpassed that or continued on, or maybe challenges that they faced and how they dealt with them and what that was like for them. I think that those things, when it comes to overcoming adversity, are definitely the most valuable things that can be shared with a mentee. And I definitely know that those are the things that I remember the most about what my mentors tell me, versus, kind of the more nuts and bolts type of things. Those stick out in my mind about, when my mentor's telling me that they went through something and what they felt like, that is definitely sticks out to me when I go through that. My first trial was a very difficult experience, in the sense that I had never gone through a trial before. And it was something that I wasn't, I wasn't feeling entirely prepared for, and it was very hard to go through that experience and not have any control. It was not about the time that I put in or how much I could have prepared, as much as I just hadn't had the experience of going to trial before. And so it was kind of shocking to me how decisions can be made and I can think that they're the wrong decision and they can still be made and not realizing sort of the suave maneuvers of trial attorneys that kind of allow things to be seen in a light that is going to be uh, to better highlight the truth of the situation or to disguise the truth of the situation. So that was a very frustrating experience for me, and to kind of face the reality of, the right thing doesn't always happen. And even though that trial, I didn't necessarily lose that trial, it was a family law case. I mean, both people were sort of equally disappointed in the outcome. I felt very bad about it, and it was a very difficult thing to get through where, I didn't feel like everything happened the way that I wanted it to. And the expectation I had for myself and that experience didn't play out. And so my mentors actually, one mentor in particular, talked about how, when she first started practicing family law, she worked for a firm where they just would, file a motion for every case no matter what. And so she ended up losing a lot of motions because, they just filed. And she's like, I know that I wouldn't be like that again, but on the one hand, it taught me how to lose, and you need to learn how to lose too, and to learn what it feels like to not be a complete success, no matter how much effort you put in, and to how to deal with that in a way that is, I guess I would say, honorable. Versus, just being sad and upset. And her comments about that, and knowing my admiration for her and how I thought she was this amazing attorney and that she had gone through this experience, probably made it so that I could have that experience and move on, and in a way that probably empowered me for future experiences of that type. I think as far as obstacles go, it's definitely a very competitive area to be in. And even though I consider myself competitive, it's very hard to be with everyone else being also as competitive. And that can create an environment where that develops a lot of insecurities, and trying to maintain confidence when you're awesome but everyone else is around you is also awesome was difficult. I also, when I first started, didn't necessarily know all the tricks. It seemed like there were all these like books and classes. I didn't know you were supposed to take there's like classes for the LSAT. Nobody ever told me. I didn't have sort of a pre-law school mentor that told me like, oh, this is what you should do or not do. And so I just kind of floated along in the beginning and kind of figured it out on my own. One of the obstacles I faced is that I really wanted to work in this very specific area of doing LGBT rights work, and there are very few jobs available on a full-time basis that are continuing, that aren't fellowships and that sort of thing, to do that kind of work. They're very limited. And so realizing that when I came out of law school, I had applied for a fellowship, and I ended up being second to this project in New York City that did elder law for, a year. It was actually two people against me. That didn't seem fair. They split the money, and so the obstacle for me was to, kind of get past that reality of the situation and develop a career for myself where I got to do all those things that I wanted to do when I was in law school in a different way than I had envisioned, which is that, so right now I might be able to have my own practice and work directly with clients, specifically with a lot of same-sex couples with a lot of unique issues as they relate to the LGBT community and family law. And then I also get to help with amicus briefs for Legal Voice and the ACLU, and get to be involved with marriage equality. And so I managed to sort of get kind of what I see as the best of both worlds, because I'm not just, writing briefs, I'm actually getting to talk to people and have very concrete activities that I do with my clients and, sort of a higher volume than I would otherwise just kind of doing impact litigation cases. But I still get to do those too because those are also interesting. And so I guess that's more about how I overcame the obstacle. But I feel like for me, that was an obstacle. And I actually think that, as far as diversity and my status as a minority, as an LGBT attorney, or I think that probably did not impact me as much because of what I wanted to do. I think it actually helped me. But I do know that, when it comes to like gender appearances and things like that, like I could imagine if I wanted to do something else that could, potentially impact. And I know a lot of experiences that others have had, and so I think it sort of depends on what area you end up falling into and what firm you end up working with. I'm very fortunate in that I interned for the ACLU when I was in law school, and I also have been a volunteer attorney for them. And so I developed the relationship with the ACLU when I was in law school and helped with their marriage equality case and all of that. So that was something that I just kind of sought out for myself and just sort of know them and continue to know them. As far as legal voice, I'm very fortunate to know David Ward, who happened to be on the Q-Law Foundation board with me, and who I'd met, in other circumstances, and knows that I do a lot of family law and specifically a lot of cases regarding de facto parentage. And so when things come up, he contacts me and others that sort of have practical experience in that area in their daily work, which is helpful when you're dealing with those types of cases on a impact litigation level, whether it's at the Court of Appeals or Supreme Court. I actually really like meeting with people, and I don't find it hard to make the time to meet and talk with somebody new, whether that is, a mentor or a mentee. I actually find it kind of fun, and so it's not hard for me to set aside the time to do that. I think sustaining that can be more difficult over time, if only because, schedules of one or the other person can make it more tricky. But I think that I definitely have been able to set aside the time, and it hasn't been a problem. Someone should be a mentor because there's actually a lot to learn in mentoring somebody else about both yourself and your own work, and not only are you able to help this person, but you develop a relationship with somebody that has a mutual interest in what you do. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this relationship. And that actually can end up being very enlightening and beneficial there could be things that you find yourself asking your mentee in the future, because as mentees, not only is it great to just have good personal relationships, but they will also grow and be attorneys that you will end up interacting with in your practice and in other capacities, and it helps build a relationship that really helps both them and you in their in the legal community in general, just by creating a supportive environment for people that are like-minded and that have similar views and goals to succeed. My advice to a young person would be when you get an opportunity, uh, seize the moment. And a lot of opportunities come your way when you're younger, when you're in law school, and you want to seize those opportunities while you can, because when you're in law school or even before, that's when you have the opportunity to explore and to actually try out different things and to have the flexibility to do that. And it's important to do that when you can because, once you do become a lawyer, you are going to find that you have less time to do those explorations. And, most people end up focusing on one area. And so I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. But in addition to that, I think it's important to be proactive in developing relationships with people and networking and going to events and become involved in the bar and minority bar associations. And even before you go to law school, like if you were to do that, you would really have the very types of relationships that we've been talking about in terms of mentoring relationships that would be invaluable to you, both through law school and in your legal career once you leave law school. And when you're thinking about entering the legal profession, I think that you need to keep in mind that it's not going to be a situation where, you're just going to be able to magically get a job without necessarily going out there and developing relationships and being proactive and in going to places where you can get involved and give back to the community and get over sort of what might be the discomfort of putting yourself out there and doing those things. So I think that's what I would encourage young people to think about that are thinking of becoming an attorney. I think that it's harder for attorneys from diverse backgrounds just by nature of the fact that they're diverse and, a lot of them happen to be minorities to find mentors that they can connect with in that personal way, which I mentioned earlier, which I think actually enhances a mentorship relationship in the sense that there is sort of an instant comfortability. And to the extent that they are able to find those people, I think that that type of support is invaluable because having already shared, and not necessarily that all the values are shared, but there is sort of a shared meaning already there, allows you to sort of skip conversations that you might otherwise have to have or may not even have that you should have in a mentorship relationship. And I definitely think that because mentoring and having mentors is very key to the success of attorneys from my perspective and from my experience, I just think it goes without saying that obviously, if mentoring were more available to underrepresented individuals, that they would be more successful if they had access to that. Well, mentorship would increase diversity in the practice of law just by allowing, if there are sort of mentorship programs that are focused on diverse attorneys, I think that is something that just naturally increases the diversity of attorneys because you have people available that again have that shared meaning that are able to support those attorneys in a way that maybe they wouldn't otherwise get. And I think that it's important to note that while it is good to have a focus on mentoring and diversity and having those connections, having a diverse mentor if you're a diverse attorney, whatever that diversity may be. There are all sorts of different kinds of mentoring relationships. And there are certainly mentoring relationships that, while I may have a core set of mentors, my larger set of mentors includes, every type of person that can be an attorney. And there's always something that, some sort of mentoring that you can get from one particular person that you can't get from anyone else. And so, it's important not just to have diverse mentors for diverse attorneys, but for diverse attorneys to be open to diversity in their own mentors. So I have a little bit of experience with this because I was involved with Kila's mentoring program and providing some structure to that. And I think that one of the things that is important is to really set expectations in the first meeting, both in terms of how frequently you will contact or see each other and in what way. And I also think it's valuable to create mentoring relationships which possibly could be not just one person but like a couple people. So for example, with the mentors that I was assigned from CULA, there were two of them so that if one wasn't available I could call the other one, and and they purposely sort of set themselves up as like a team of mentors. But I also think that even having a situation where you maybe have an attorney that is a younger attorney, and then you have sort of a mid-career attorney and maybe a very much like sort of a more experienced later career attorney, and putting them all together and having that be an ongoing thing would be very valuable. And that's something that I know that there are minority bars that do that structure that could be really helpful, because everyone sort of gets an angle on that as far as benefiting and learning and really increasing their perspectives from multiple angles. And even throwing a law student in there, like that could be a great arrangement. In addition to that, I think that one of the reasons why mentorship arrangements fail is because there's this sort of expectation that the other person's going to be the person that initiates everything or is proactive, and if they don't, like, oh well, they don't like me, or maybe it's just not going to work, or but really you get what you put into your mentorship relationship. And if you're not putting anything in, then it's not fair to blame the other person for not contacting you, or not giving you kind of what you had expected. And I think it's important to keep in mind that it is a two-way street, and it's okay to sometimes be the person that is more initiating, because I think a lot of times mentors in particular, because they are just tend to be for some reason very busy people, actually respond a lot more to initiating by perhaps the mentee than the other way around. I think my expectations of mentees are that they will come to me if they have something that they want to talk about, and won't necessarily rely on me to be checking in with them all the time. And I think it's important to recognize that while there are time limitations, or certainly like schedules can be difficult, that it's okay to to be the person that initiates conversations, and I think that mentees also need to be I think they need to keep their expectations both. I think they need to keep their expectations set in such a way where, not only do they're not going to get a job from the experience, but they will get something that, recognize that there's all sorts of things that you can get from a mentorship relationship. And possibly one of them is a job, but it could be not that person, or there's a lot of different things that can go on. And I don't really know, like, I've had a lot of mentees too, and with the mentee relationships, I think that what it really comes down to is whether I personally click with them, and because I think I definitely somehow, if I have mentors, I've personally picked most of my mentors. When you're set up, and most of mine have been sort of set up, so it definitely, sometimes it either works or it doesn't.